In this Blender tutorial, I'll show you how to create this procedural dirt material. Now this material is actually an updated version from my very first procedural dirt material, which I created over 4 years ago. So I've gotten some requests in the comments of my videos to update my old procedural material tutorials. And I think that's a great idea because I've definitely improved my skills over the past 5 years of making Blender tutorials. There's also been some node changes in Blender, like the Mix RGB node being changed to the Mix Color node, and also the Musgrave node being merged with the noise texture. And I've also really improved my skills with creating procedural materials, so the materials look more realistic now. I've also learned how to add displacement so the materials actually pop out of the mesh, and also in my newer procedural material videos I show you how to join the materials together into custom node groups so they're more customizable. So over the following weeks and months you might see some new tutorials which are an update from my old procedural material videos. Now if you're one of my customers of my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack, I'm not going to be getting rid of the old materials, I'll just be adding these new materials to the Ultimate Procedural Material Pack. So in this video, we'll be creating this dirt material and we'll also be joining it together into a node group. So we have the scale value so you can change the size of the entire material. Then we also have two different dirt colors. So dirt color 1, which is just kind of a brown color, and then dirt color 2, which is like a very dark brown. Then we also have just the dirt scale, and then we also have the dirt detail. So if you turn this down, it looks more lumpy, or you can turn the detail up. We also have this dirt roughness value, so if you turn the dirt roughness really up, it kind of looks more powdery. And then we also have the crack scale, then we also have the detail of the cracks, and then we also have the cracks thickness. So if you turn the cracks thickness to like a 0.1, you can see there's all these little large cracks and chunks, which I think also look pretty cool. And then we also have the roughness of the material, so you could make it more like a wet dirt or more of a dry dirt. And then we have the dirt bump strength. We also have this lumpy bump strength. We also have the bump strength for the cracks, and then we also have a bump strength for those little dots. And then finally, we have a displacement strength if you want to pop out the mesh. And if you'd like to purchase this procedural material, you can get it with the links in the description. And you can also check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack, which comes with all of my procedural materials pre-set up in Blender's asset browser with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. You can also purchase my procedural material packs, which are just packs of 10 materials. And you can learn how to create more procedural materials by checking out my Blender procedural material tutorial playlist here on YouTube. So before we start, I'll show you what I have set up in the 3D viewport if you want to set up the blend file the same way that I have. So I went to the add menu and I went to mesh and added an icosphere, and then right behind me on the add icosphere settings, I turned the subdivisions up to 6 so it's nice and smooth and round, and the displacements will also have more geometry to pop out the mesh. And then I shaded the object smooth, and then I'll scale it down to a 0.2 and then just press Ctrl A and apply the scale. That is a better size for the object. Then I just added a camera and I just pointed the camera at the sphere. And if you select the camera and click over here to go to the object data properties, I turned the focal length up to 80 just to kind of zoom it in a bit. And also on the output properties, I made the resolution X and Y the same so it's a square image. Then I also added a few different lights to light up the scene. So I added this area light right here. So if you go to the add menu and go to light, you can add the area light. And then over here in the area light settings, I turned the power to 70 and I turned the shape to disk so it is round. And then I duplicated this light and I made another one right over here. The power is set to 150. So this way I kind of have a rim light on the back and then a main light kind of on the side. And then also if you go over here to the world properties, I added this wooden lounge 1K HDRI from polyhaven.com. I'll have a link in the video description if you want to download it. So to add in the HDRI, you can click on the yellow dot here next to color, you can choose environment texture, and then you can click on the open button and open up the downloaded HDRI. And then if you want to set the background to transparent, you can go here to the render properties, open up the film tab, and just check mark the transparent button. And then as for the color management, if you scroll right down here on the render properties, I set the view transform to filmic, and I set the look to very high contrast, so the colors are more saturated and contrasted. So I'm in the shading workspace. I'm just going to close this side panel here so we have more space. So I have the 3D viewport right here, and I'll go into the rendered view. We'll just select the object and let's add a new material. And I'll just call this dirt, and then I will also be using the Node Wrangler add-on in the video. So if you don't have that enabled, click on edit, go to the preferences, and then over here on the add-ons tab, just search for node and just enable the Node Wrangler add-on. And we'll just close the user preferences. So let's start off by making the base color. So I'm going to go to the add menu and I'm going to search for a noise texture. Let's preview the noise texture with Control Shift selecting it, and then with the noise texture selected, I'll hit Control T. That's using the Node Wrangler add-on, and it's going to add the texture, coordinate, and mapping. And I want to put the object into the vector, and that way we're using the object coordinates, and the object coordinates coordinates will place the texture on the object more evenly. Let's just drag the texture coordinate mapping down here, and I'll hit Ctrl J to join it together into a frame just to keep the nodes nicely organized, and I'll press F2 to give it a label, and I'll just call this mapping. So let's change some of the noise texture settings. So I'm going to turn the scale to 20. Let's turn the detail up to 10 so it's pretty detailed. And then I'll turn the roughness to a 0.55. So I want to make it more contrasted. So we're going to search for a color ramp and drop the color ramp here after the noise. And then I can drag the black tab over and drag the white tab over. So instead of it just being kind of a mellow gray, it's going to be more contrasted. So there's more clear areas where it's black and white. But now I want to create some colors for the dirt. So I'm going to search for a mix color. Let's drop the mix color right here. And the color is going to go into the factor. And by using the mix color instead of the color ramp to create the custom colors, we'll have these node sockets here. So we can plug the sockets into the group input when we're creating a customizable node group. So the color goes into the factor. So the black and white values are determining what part will be color A and what part will be color B. So for color A, I'm going to make this a brown color, and then I'll make it very dark. And then for color B, this is also going to be a brown color, but it will be a little bit less dark. And if you are interested in using the exact same colors I'm using, here's the hex value I'll be using for the black color. And then here is the hex code that I'll be using for the brown color. So now the mixed result can go into the base color, and I'll just preview the principled shader. Let's also box select these nodes, join them together into a frame, and I can select the frame and add a label, and I'm just going to call this base color to keep things really nicely organized. Now I also want to create a roughness map, so there's a bit of variation in the roughness, so more parts have more moisture and other parts are more dry. So to do this, I'm going to search for a color ramp. We'll drop the color ramp down here. And then I'm going to take the noise texture factor and I'll put that into this color ramp, and this color ramp color can go into the roughness. Let's just box select these nodes and drag them back a little bit. So now you can see there's a little bit of difference here in the roughness, but I want to change these values to kind of change where the roughness is or how the roughness looks. So I'm going to drag the black tab out a little bit, and then I'll drag this white tab over quite a bit more, and you can see if there's more white colors, it's going to be more rough. And make sure the white color is just fully white. Now later in the custom node group, I want to be able to control the roughness values. So I can search for a hue saturation value and put this after the color ramp. And now we have this value which I can drag up and down to make it more rough or more shiny. So we'll box select these nodes, join them into a frame, add a label, and I'll just call this roughness, again, just to keep things nicely organized. So now what I want to do is create the texture for the little cracks. So I'm going to search for a noise texture. We'll drop this here, and let's take the vector of the mapping, put that into the noise, and then with the noise texture selected, I'll press Ctrl-Shift-D to duplicate the node, but keep the wire plugged up. So we're gonna have two different noise textures for the cracks. Now what I'm also gonna do is search for a Voronoi texture. We'll drop this right up here, and let's just preview the Voronoi texture. Now we're going to use the Voronoi texture to actually create the main cracks, but then the noise texture is going to distort the Voronoi to make it look more random. So to make the Voronoi look like cracks, we can change the middle value here from F1 to distance to edge. And now you can see there's some little cracks. And then we can change the size of the Voronoi, so I'll turn the scale to a 25, but I'll leave the other settings how they are. So now the noise texture color can go into the vector, and so now you can see the noise texture is distorting the Voronoi, so it looks more random. And then let's change some of the noise texture settings. So I'll turn the scale to a 2.5, I'll turn the detail to 10, and I'll leave the other settings how they are. Now later on when I create the custom node group, I want a value which is going to make the cracks more thin or more thick. So let's search for another hue saturation value and drop it here. And we have this value, and if I drag the value up and down, that'll make it brighter and darker. And so you can see that is changing the thickness of the cracks, because if it's more white, if I turn the value up, the cracks are a bit smaller. So we'll use that later in the custom node group. Let's just drag these nodes down so we have a little bit more space. Now these cracks aren't thin enough, so to make them more thin, I can search for a color ramp and drop it here after the hue saturation value, and I can just drag the white tab way over so it's very contrasted. So I'll just stick it right there, so now the cracks are really tiny. So now for this second noise texture, we're going to use this noise texture to kind of blotch out some areas, because I don't want these cracks all over the place, I just want a few areas here and there where there's cracks. So what I'm going to do is preview the noise texture, and we'll change some of the settings. So I'll turn the scale to 30, and I'll turn the detail to 10, and I'll leave the other settings how they are. So now I'm going to select the color ramp, and I'll duplicate it and drop it here. And then with the color ramp selected, you can hit the backspace to just reset the color ramp. And I'm going to use this to create a mask. So we're going to drag the black tab to about here and then drag the white tab to about here. So now you can just see there are just a few areas where it's black, but it's mostly white. So we're going to mix this into this texture. So we're going to mix these two together. So to do this, we can search for a mix color because the mix color node is going to mix two colors together. And we're going to put this color ramp color into the factor, and then we're going to take the color ramp color and we're going to put that into color A. And let's just preview the mix here. So now color B, let's just make this fully white. So if I just preview this color ramp, you can see where the black parts are. That is where the cracks are going to show up, but then the other parts are just going to be white. So this way, instead of the cracks being all over the place, that would just look like way too many cracks. There's just going to be a few cracks here and there. So we'll box select these nodes, add them into a frame, add a label, and I'm just going to call this cracks to keep things really organized. So let's now preview the principled shader again. So this really doesn't look like dirt right now because it doesn't really have any bump. So we're going to be adding a lot of values into the normal to give it some bump. So let's just drag these nodes out of the way here, just drag it back so we have a bit more space. And I'm going to search for a bump node because we need to use a bump node to convert color data into normal data. For example, on the cracks here, if I take the mix result and put that into the normal directly, you can see there's this really weird dark area and there's some shading issues. That's because we need to use the bump node to convert it into normal data so it can go into the normal. So let's first just go up here to this noise texture on the base color and we'll put the factor into the height value of the bump. And now I can take the bump normal and put that into the normal, and now you can see it's converting it to bump data or normal data, so it looks really bumpy. But it's quite a bit too strong right now, so I'll turn the strength to a 0.25, so just a quarter of the strength. So now there's just a bit of bump over the surface. But I want to add more layers of bump, so we will duplicate the bump by hitting Shift D to duplicate it, and we're going to drop it here after the first one. So the normal can go into the normal, so we now have this extra height value that we can add data into. So let's just take the mix result right here from the cracks, and we're going to put this into the height value. And now if I zoom in here, you can just see, like right there, there's some little cracks. And I'm going to turn the bump strength up to a 0.6 so the cracks are quite a bit stronger. So you can see little cracks there over the surface. So now I want to add two more layers of bump, and they're going to be a bunch of little dots or kind of spots which are kind of caving in a little bit. And then we're also just going to create another layer of noise. So let's just create that right down here. So we're going to search for a noise texture, drop it here, and we can take the mapping from the mapping here in the texture coordinate. We'll put the vector into the vector of the noise texture, so it's using the object coordinates. Now let's just preview the noise texture. So I'm going to turn the scale up to 60, and I'm going to turn the detail up to 10, so it's pretty detailed. And then this roughness, I'm going to turn this down to a 0.25, so you can see it's a little bit more blobby. So now what I can do is go back up here to the bumps, and I'll drag this bump over, and I'm going to duplicate this bump and drop it here in between these two, so just right there. So you can see the normal is going into the normal, and then the normal from this bump is going into the normal. So now let's take this bottom noise texture, and we'll put the factor into the height value, and I can just preview the principled shader. So you can see now we have these large bumps over the material. So let's make the bump strength less strong. So I'm going to turn it down to like a 0.2, so it just gives a little bit of bump. So you can now see the dirt just has little areas where it's kind of bumping out, and it definitely looks more realistic. So I now want to create one more layer of bump just to make it more detailed. So for this last one, we're going to search for a Voronoi texture and drop it here. And again, we can take the mapping vector and put that into the Voronoi texture, so it's using the object coordinates. And let's just preview the Voronoi texture. So for this, I'm going to turn the scale to 600, and I'm also going to turn the detail up to just a very small value of 1, so it's just slightly more detailed. But I'll leave all the other settings how they are. Now to keep things nicely organized, I'm going to box select these nodes and join them into a frame, and I'll add a label, and I'll just call this extra bump detail. So now we can take the Voronoi distance, and we want to put that into the bump as well. So we're going to duplicate the bump one more time, and we're going to drop it right here, drag it down, and then we're going to take the Voronoi distance, and we're going to put that into the strength value of this bump. And let's just drag the material output back, and we can preview the principled shader. And actually I put that into the wrong value. We don't want to put it into the strength value. We want to put that into the height value. So now you can see it's adding all these tiny little bumps, but it is too strong. So let's just turn it down to like a 0.25. So you can see with it off, there isn't quite as much detail, but then with it turned on, there's just tiny little bits of detail. There's kind of all these little bumps going into the material. And then let's box select these nodes and join them into a frame. We can add a label, and we can just call this bumps, or you can call it normal. Now, one more thing I want to do to this material to make it look very realistic and add more detail is to add some displacement so the material is actually popping out of the mesh. So just like we've done for these bumps here, we need to add a node which is going to convert the textures into displacement data. So let's search for a displacement node and drop this under the principled shader. And we're just going to go right up here to this base color here, and we're going to take the normal factor and we're going to drag this all the way over here and stick it into the height value of the displacement. And now the displacement can go into the displacement of the material output. Now it does look a lot stronger, it looks more bumpy, but it's not actually popping out of the mesh. If you look on the side here, you can see it's smooth. So to fix this, we're going to open up the side panel and we're going to go to the material settings, and here on the settings surface, we want to take the bump only and we want to turn this to displacement and bump. So now you can see the displacement is working. So let's close the side panel. But you can see that is way too strong. It looks really sharp and it's popping out way too much. So let's turn the displacement way down. So I'm going to turn the scale to a 0.015, just a 0.015. So if you look here on the edges, you can see it definitely is bumping out the mesh. But what's so useful about this is that we're going to be joining it together into a node group. So if you want to, you can make it stronger, but I'll keep the default value pretty small. So there we have it. There is the procedural dirt material. So let's now join it together into a custom node group so you can customize the material. So I'm going to click and drag to box select all the nodes except the material output, and I'll press Ctrl G to join it together into a node group. And I'll hit the tab key to go outside the node group. I'll just drag the node group right up here. Let's drag it out to make it bigger, and I can just rename the node group. So let's hit the tab key to go into the node group, and I'll hit the N key to open up the side panel. And here in the group sockets, I'm going to rename this to shader because I like that a bit better. So outside the node group, it's called shader now. So back into the node group, if we go over here to the left side, we have this group input, and we can plug values up to this group input to control them outside of the node group. So the first value that I want to add is the scale to control the size of the entire material. Now all of these noise textures have scale values, but we need to all add them up, and you can see they all have different scale values. But this mapping is plugged up to all the textures, so this mapping node, the scale here is going to control the size of the entire material at once. So we'll put the scale into the extra socket, and then we will click on the scale here, and this scale value, you can see this scale value is 3 values controlling the X, Y, and Z, but I just want this to be one scale value to control the size of the entire material. So on the vector here, we're going to change this to float. Then we need to turn the default value to 1, and then if we go outside the node group, we can turn the scale back to 1. So now the scale value will change the entire size. So we'll go back into the node group. So now I want to add the custom colors. So we'll drag the group input right over here where the base color is, and we'll take color B, put that into the extra socket, and then color A, put that into the extra socket. And then here on the side panel on the group sockets, we can rename this. So I'll rename this to color 1, and then this one here is going to be color 2. Then I want to control these noise texture settings. So let's drag the group input right here, and we're going to put the scale and the detail and the roughness into these sockets. And I'm just going to rename these to dirt scale and dirt detail and also dirt roughness. And then I want to control the settings for the cracks. So let's drag this mapping back here, and I'll drag this down, and I want to control the size of the entire cracks. So we have different scale values, but what I can do is just add another mapping node to control the entire size. So I'm just going to search for a mapping node. Let's just drop the mapping node here, and you can see there is this noise texture. Let's just drag this up here, and then also this noise texture. So what I can do is hold down the shift key and right click and drag over these nodes or over the wires and then let go, and that is going to add a reroute. This makes it really easy just to drop the mapping node right there. So now we can just drag these nodes back here, and we can also drag the mapping and the reroute here inside the cracks. And then if you want to, you can select the reroute and press Control X. That's going to get rid of the reroute, but it'll keep the nodes plugged up here, or keep the wires plugged up. So we now have this mapping, and so this scale value is just going to control the size of all of these textures in the cracks. So we'll put the scale into the extra socket, we'll click on the scale, and we're going to change the type to float, and then the default value we need to turn to 1, and then outside the node group we need to turn the scale back to 1. So this will change the size of just the cracks. So we'll go back into the node group. Then I want to control the detail level. So you can see there's this detail level here on this top noise. So that's going to control the detail of the cracks. So we'll put this into the extra socket. Let's just drag this down here. And we need to rename both of these. So this is going to be cracks scale. And this one here, this is going to be cracks detail. And then I also want to control the thickness of the cracks, and that's going to be controlled by the value here on the hue saturation value. If I turn it down, it's going to make the cracks larger. So we'll put the value into the extra socket, and I'll just rename that to cracks thickness. Then I'm going to control the roughness of the material. So we'll drag the group input way over here, and we can put the value here. Let's turn the value back to 1. That's the default. And then I'll put the value into the extra socket here. And this I can just rename to roughness. And then I want to control the bump strengths, so we'll just drag this right down here. And if accidentally this got put in a frame, you can press Alt-P to bring it out of the frame. So the first one here, that is going to be just the dirt bump strength. So we'll put the strength into the extra socket. This one we'll call dirt bump strength. The second one here, you can see that's just those kind of lumpy bits. So we'll put the strength into the extra socket. And this one I'll call lumpy bump strength. Then the third one here, you can see that's controlling the cracks. So we'll put this into the extra socket, and this one I'll rename to cracks bump strength. And then the last one here, that is controlling those little bits there that look kind of like dots. So we'll put this one into the extra socket, put the strength into the extra socket, and this one I'll just rename to dots bump strength. And then finally, I want to be able to control the displacement strength. So if we drag the group input right up here, let's put the scale from the displacement into the extra socket, and I'll just call that displacement strength. So I'm going to drag the group output right up here, and then we can take the group input and I'll drag it right here behind all of the nodes. And I'll hit the N key to close the side panel, and I'll hit Tab to go outside the node group. And here's the final material. So I'll just review the final material. So we have the scale value, and then we also have both of the colors. We also have the dirt scale, and we also have the dirt detail, and then also the dirt roughness. So if you want to turn up the roughness, it looks more like a powdery dirt, or if you turn it down, it's more lumpy. We also have the crack scale, the detail of the cracks, and also the thickness of the cracks. And turning it down to 0 or just like a 0.1 makes it look pretty interesting as well. We also have the roughness of the material. We also have the dirt bump strength, lumpy bump strength, the cracks bump strength, the dots bump strength, and then finally the displacement strength to pop out the mesh. So that's going to finish it up for this tutorial. So I hope you found the tutorial helpful, and thank you so much for watching. And if you'd like to help support the channel as well as purchase the procedural material to use in your projects, you can purchase it with the links in the description on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. And if you like using procedural materials in your projects, then definitely check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack, which comes with all of my procedural materials pre-set up for Blender's asset browser with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. And you can also learn how to create more procedural materials by checking out my Blender Procedural Material Tutorial playlist here on YouTube, so all the links are in the description. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for watching.